Mormon, Strang's witnesses did not remain faithful to their testimonies. Milo Quaife, in his early standard biography of Strang, reflected that it's quite conceivable that Strang's angelic visitations may have had only a subjective existence in the brain of the man who reported them, but the metallic plates possessed a very material objective reality. If we're unwilling to accept the book of the law of the Lord as authentically divine, he says, we can hardly escape the conclusion that Strang knowingly fabricated and planted them for the purpose of duping his credulous followers, and accordingly that Strang's prophetic career was a false and impudent imposture. Well, I'll skip a little bit more on that. It seems that virtually every reputable writer on the subject now grants the sincerity and honesty of all or most of the Book of Mormon witnesses. And this reminds me, by the way, of J.B. Haldane's theory, or his schema of how scientific theories that are once rejected come to be accepted. Stage 1, the new theory is denounced as false and complete nonsense. Stage 2, it's described as perverse but an interesting thought. Stage 3, it's true but unimportant. Stage 4, I've always said that. I think we may be at stage 3 with regard to the witnesses. It's true that they're sincere, but that doesn't matter. A few critics argue that the printed testimonies don't really represent what the witnesses said. I want non-LDS to know, wrote one recent poster on an internet message board, that regardless of the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon and the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, not a single witness ever touched the plates with their own hands and never saw the plates with their own eyes. When Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery supposedly had visions of the Book of Mormon for their testimony, only Joseph Smith wrote their testimony down in the Book of Mormon. But the witness testimonies appear in the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting. They're copies of the original ones, which were probably kept with the original manuscript, but are no longer extant. Significantly, when Orson Pratt and Joseph F. Smith visited David Whitmer near the end of his life and was shown the printer's manuscript, Whitmer claimed that this was the original. But Joseph F. asked Whitmer why then Whitmer's signature was written in the same hand as everything else. Whitmer had no ready answer. But Whitmer clearly remembered that he had individually signed the statement of the 3 witnesses, thus personally witnessing that he agreed with what was written there. These testimonies have been published with the Book of Mormon ever since the first edition in 1830, which, since it was prepared under the careful supervision of Oliver Cowdery, one of the 3, and Hiram Smith, one of the 8, seems to imply their endorsement of those statements. The other witnesses, too, had plenty of time to distance themselves from those printed testimonies, but instead consistently affirmed them. For instance, a correspondent for the Salem, Massachusetts Advertiser and Argus reported in 1843 having heard Hiram, quote, declare in this city in public that what is recorded about the plates and so on and so forth is God's solemn truth, end quote. E.C. Brand visited John Whitmer, one of the 8, in 1875, and recorded that Whitmer declared that his testimony as found in the testimony of 8 witnesses in the Book of Mormon is strictly true. In 1876, Whitmer told Mark Forscott, I have never heard that any one of the 3 or 8 witnesses ever denied the testimony that they have borne to the book as published in the first edition of the Book of Mormon. And later that same year, referring to the published testimony, he told Heman Smith, that testimony was, is, and will be true, henceforth and forever. Finally, in 1877, the year prior to his death, he wrote, concerning my testimony as recorded in the Book of Mormon, that it is the same as it was from the beginning, and it is true. Today's attack on the witnesses focuses on the alleged non-literalness of their experience. Dan Vogel is the principal advocate of this method of dismissing their testimony. For example, in his 2002 essay on the validity of the witnesses' testimonies, he attempts to devalue their statements by portraying them as alienated from empirical reality and as having merely imagined the plates of the Book of Mormon or seen them in a subjective hallucination. I've commented elsewhere on how bizarre it is to me that the witnesses, a group of early 19th century farmers who spent their lives rising at sunrise, pulling up stumps, clearing rocks, plowing fields, sowing seeds, carefully nurturing crops, raising livestock, milking cows, digging wells, building cabins, raising barns, harvesting their own food, bartering in an often cashless economy for what they could not produce themselves, wearing clothes made from plant fibers and skins, anxiously watching the seasons, and walking or riding animals out under the weather until they retired to their beds shortly after sunset in a world lit only by fire, are being portrayed as estranged from everyday empirical reality by people whose lives, like mine, consists to a large extent of staring at computer and television screens in artificially air-conditioned, artificially lit homes and offices clothed in synthetic fibers, commuting between the two in enclosed and air-conditioned mechanical vehicles while they listen to the radio, chat on their cell phones, and fiddle with their iPods, all of whose inner workings are largely mysterious to them, who buy their prepackaged food with little or no regard for the time or the season by means of plastic cards and electronic financial transfers from artificially illuminated and air-conditioned supermarkets enmeshed in international distribution networks of which they know virtually nothing, the rhythms of whose daily lives are largely unaffected by the rising and setting of the sun. Yet Vogel's view of the witnesses has recently been given wider currency in an article published by the non-Mormon biblical scholar Lester Grabb, who commendably seeks to show that Joseph Smith's story can illuminate ancient Hebrew prophecy. Unfortunately, Professor Grabb's discussion is wholly dependent upon Vogel, and wholly uninformed by any exposure to the work of the leading authority on the witnesses, Richard Lloyd Anderson. Grabb readily grants the sincerity of Martin Harris and David Whitmer, but also declares that it seems that no one saw the plates uncovered except Smith himself. Both Martin Harris and David Whitmer, of the three witnesses, he writes, while continuing to affirm their belief in the Book of Mormon, also stated that they had seen the plates in spirit or with spiritual eyes or in vision. Professor Grabb cites the Reverend John A. Clark's recollection of an unnamed attorney's alleged recollection of an alleged statement from Martin Harris. A gentleman in Palmyra, bred to the law, a professor of religion and of undoubted veracity, told me that on one occasion he appealed to Harris and asked him directly, "Did you see those plates?" Harris replied he did. "Did you see the plates and the engraving on them with your bodily eyes?" Harris replied, "Yes, I saw them with my eyes. They were shown unto me by the power of God and not of man. But did you see them with your natural, your bodily eyes, just as you see this pencil case in my hand? Now say no or yes to this." Harris replied, "Why, I did not see them as I do that pencil case, yet I saw them with the eye of faith. I saw them just as distinctly as I see anything around me, though at the time they were covered over with a cloth." Now that's the problematic last part. And yet Professor Grabb acknowledges the situation with the 8 witnesses is more complex, and some continue to assert that these members of the Whitmer family and others saw and handled the plates in a purely physical context. Some of the testimony certainly gives this impression, but we have a few later interviews with most of the 8 witnesses. There is some evidence that their experience was also spiritual or visionary or whatever one might want to call it. How did the witnesses come to see the plates? Thomas Ford, the former governor of Illinois, who, Grabb assures us, actually knew many Mormons, explains it all by means of an account of the experiences of the witnesses. Unfortunately, as Grabb concedes, he does not give his sources, and he has some of the names slightly wrong. Here it is. Joseph Smith set them to continual prayer and other spiritual exercises to acquire this lively faith by means of which the hidden things of God could be spiritually discerned. And at last, when he could delay them no longer, he assembled them in a room. Lucy Mack Smith says it was a grove near their house, and produced a box, which he said contained the precious treasure. The lid was opened. The witnesses peeped into it, but making no discovery, for the box was empty, they said, "Brother Joseph, we do not see the plates." The prophet answered them, "O ye of little faith, how long will God bear with this wicked and perverse generation? Down on your knees, brethren, every one of you, and pray God for the forgiveness of your sins, and for a holy and living faith which cometh down from heaven." The disciples dropped to their knees and began to pray in the fervency of their spirit, supplicating God for more than 2 hours with fanatical earnestness, at the end of which time, looking again into the box, they were now persuaded that they saw the plates. I leave it to philosophers to determine whether the fumes of an enthusiastic and fanatical imagination are thus capable of blinding the mind and deceiving the senses by so absurd a delusion. The details transmitted by Ford may be inaccurate, Dan Vogel comments, but the essence of the account contains an element of truth. An even more entertaining version of this theory appeared on an ex-Mormon message board just a few days ago. You see where I get my best data. Quote, "I used to tease my kids. I would take my coat or a towel or a blanket and gather it up in the crook of my arm. Then I would stick my face down into it and make a whimpering sound like a puppy. Then I would make a petting motion. My little kids would see what was going on, and guess what? They wanted to see the puppy. Of course, I refused to let them see the puppy because there was not one. Then I would walk into another room. The kids would follow, demanding to see the puppy. I would run into another room. The kids would follow, but by then the puppy was gone. I would claim to have hidden the puppy. The kids would go crazy trying to find the puppy. It was great fun, but as my kids got a little older, they finally caught on. The trick no longer worked. When I tried it on their younger cousins, my kids would scoff and give the secret right off. Why was it a puppy? Because I said so, because I could make the sound of a puppy, because kids like puppies, and a puppy would fit under the cover. I never claimed to have a rabid grizzly bear or adult crocodile under the wrap for the inverse of all the reasons stated above. How convenient that the gold plates were gold instead of wood or zinc or stone. How convenient that they were a certain size and that they disappeared and that only Joe could read them. How convenient for the blood-sucking scum that currently runs the Mormon Corporation today that so many fanatical Mormon adults are dumb as preschoolers about certain things. It's high-quality analysis there. Professor Grab cites an account of an encounter between Theodore Turley and John Whitmer. Whitmer asked, "Do you hint at me